On this episode of AVWeek, the acquisitions continue as AVI-SPL is acquired, smart buildings based on feelings, and RF transmissions make it through meat. These stories and more on AVWeek.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
AV Week.
Performing scan.
Week.
Online.
This is AV Week. AV Week. This is AV Week, episode 244, Acquisitions and Feeling, recorded April 29th, 2016. And good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another episode of AV Week, your source for news and information in the audio-video integration world. I'm your host today, George Tucker. Welcome, and thank you for watching us. This week, we have a Virgin crew sent a call out to see if we can get first-timers on the show, and boy, did you guys respond. I had way too many and a long list of people to be on future shows, so thank you very much. We always want your voices on this show, and it's a great thing to have. So, first off, without any delay, we have David Maldow. He is from Let's Do Video. How are you, sir?
Good. Thanks for having me. Maldow, by the way.
Maldow. Well, I am infamous for screwing up names, so there you go. It's going to get worse. Here we go. Also joining us is Omar Rosado. He is from Digital OAV. How are you, sir?
I'm doing just fine. Excited to be here.
Okay, glad to have you on. And last but not least, we have Shai Moshe. He is from Communications Pros. How are you, sir?
I'm doing very well, thanks. Thanks for having me, George.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. All right, well, let's start this off because someone suggested that maybe for this time period, between now and, say, InfoComm 2016, we should be calling it Acquisition Week, not AV Week, because, of course, our first story is about AVI-SPL being acquired by a venture capitalist firm. This, of course, comes to us from a fine folks at Commercial Integrator. HIG is a venture capitalist firm who owns a lot of stuff. They own a lot of building, a lot of integration, a lot of distribution, a lot of media. So I'm going to start off with you, David. Let's look at this. Do you think this bodes well for, say, the AV business being something that venture capitalists are interested in, or do you see another motive?
I have mixed feelings about it. It's not as simple as, for example, the Mitel Polycom deal. I mean, those are two business communications companies. They have the same goals. Is HIG really interested in integration and reselling communications equipment, or are they interested in making money? So if they're happy to let AVI-SPL do its thing, because AVI-SPL knows what they're doing, and make money and collect profits, then I'm happy. But if they do the venture capital thing where they're like, we make a lot of money if you grow, you have to grow, and push AVI-SPL to do things that may not be the right move to grow this year, then bad things can happen. So I'm hoping they'll have a kind of hands-off approach.
Yeah, Shai, David mentions that they're worried about the hands-on or, maybe dictating methodologies. Is there a danger here that they move to say, don't sell those kind of boxes, sell these things because there's a higher profit ratio and we like that interest in our world?
Well, if they do, it wouldn't be different than what we're seeing in the industry as a whole, right? So the answer to the question is we'll have to wait and see. Unfortunately, I don't have a distinct answer. But is there a risk? There certainly is. I think let's keep in mind AVI-SPL was owned by a large conglomerate prior to this acquisition too. So they're not new to being owned by private equity. And I can tell you that the soon-to-be former private equity firm was much more strict about things like that than I think a lot of people, because they're very, very technology-focused. The former company that owned them was. So, yeah, I think a lot of it will be, hopefully in the hands of AVI-SPL leadership and management in terms of what direction to head, and a little bit of guidance from the board with their new owners, but only time will tell.
Yeah, Omar, let's bring you into this conversation. Do you think that I'm having trouble with this. Do you see any other motives as to why one would go from being held from a venture capitalist becoming, owned by themselves and then going back to a venture capitalist? Why do that?
Honestly, that's a good question, and to be frank, I mean, I agree with the other two gentlemen as far as keeping the hands off and let AVI do what they do. But the strategy and the reason why they're going through this particular process and the ownership, that's beyond my expertise to answer properly. But to see what the end game is, it's hard for me to envision why would a financial company or investment company, whatever they are, have an interest in AVI other than technology. That's my 2 cents.
Mm. Do any of you fine folks think that perhaps maybe this is something to add as, say, a service provider to all of their other holdings?
Oh.
Is that a possibility, or is that limited? Is that too limited?
I can tell you from my experience in working directly with service providers that a company like an AVI-SPL, some of its competitors, they offer those types of integration services as a complement to the service providers. And when you think about the way the industry is going, certainly from a pure growth perspective, AV in services in AV is certainly becoming a lot more popular and growing from what I see, right? Some spots might have different opinions than people. But from a sheer revenue and activity perspective, that's growing. And so you look at these service providers, they're looking at it like, okay, this might be a way for us to grow. This might be a revenue stream for us to help grow by an acquisition of this kind versus growing it organically. And most of us on this call have seen what it's like to grow an AV practice organically. It's not easy, it's not fast, it's not cheap. And so to be able to do something like that where you can kind of pull the trigger and purchase would certainly be attractive to a large service provider.
Yeah. Maybe I'm being a little too negative about this. I mean, I'd love to think that HIV says, oh, we have these other holdings and there's some synergy and we could help them all go together. But in my mind, I really think it's more that AVI-SPL had a fantastic year last year, and they're poised to have an even better year this year. And it's these venture capital guys, they like to jump on when it's happening like this. And now's the time to jump on. I really think and I hope I'm wrong, but I really think it's about making money quickly.
Well, but there's the question then, because audiovisual and integration has never been a high margin industry. I mean, we make money, but our margins are not extraordinary. Not enough for, say, venture capitalists to be going after it. I mean, I know a number of venture capitalists who back, say, things like Twitter and Snapchat and all the host of things behind it that avoid hardware of any sort by anyone at any cost. And I find it interesting that an investment capital or venture capital group would be looking at someone who does basically hardware.
You hit it on the head. I think so. So the interesting part about what you said and what's happening right now with this story is any company willing to invest some dollars into an AVI-SPL will be successful, because if you look at purely from a global delivery and services support perspective, there aren't very many companies that can provide true global services and true global support. So a company with that's managing $19 billion worth of capital, if they go out there and put a few bucks and now actually put some global support behind it, they'll be able to provide something very, very few companies in the globe can provide in terms of global support.
So it sounds like a bit of a shifting sands for what the business model of many of our industry folks are like, huh? All right, well, talking of shifting sands, let's move on to something that we've been watching for a while. Not something that is a shock, but Intel from our friends at Engadget.com talked to us about explaining their strategy for moving beyond the PC. So these guys are talking about, and the CEO of Intel is talking about the fact that they are not really designing their chips and their progress around a central sort of processing computer. But it's going to be about the cloud and about IoT in their words. And if you link through the story itself, there's an article by the CEO listing out the 5 things he thinks are the tenets of the growth. They claim that this is not about the Moore's law sort of sputtering out, and that they need to find other ways to make that efficiency happen. But they're really talking about us becoming, again, a centralized computer with thin clients rather than the sort of centralized model. David, I'm going to put this to you. Do you think that they have merit here, that that's really the way it's going, and will we all be subscribing our services from Intel in the future?
Yeah, I think the model makes sense. An analogy, a very apt analogy, I think. Logitech makes keyboards that go well with PCs. If people are buying less PCs, and Logitech is smart enough to say, hey, well, what do we do? Where else can we sell our keyboards? So they made a keyboard for an iPad, and it was one of their hottest selling products. So Intel makes chips. If people are going to buy less PCs that their chips go into, they're going to look for other places to put those chips, and that makes perfect sense. And with the Internet of Things, eventually we could put chips in there. And one final thought on that, you said it's not about Moore's Law dying, and I read the article by the CEO. I agree. It's about Moore's Law continuing to the point where chips get so small and so cheap that we just put them in everything. So it's not just PCs. And the example I use, it's a bit of a silly example, but any guitarist knows that these things disappear. And eventually, if a chip costs a penny and is the size of a head of a pin, and you have one in each of these, you say, Siri, where's my guitar pick? And Siri says, there's one in your pocket. And I think that's where Intel's going. Just put the chips in everything.
Isn't that like, I think there's a product that they call Tag. I think you can find your phone with it. And
Exactly.
Find the tag. Omar, this changes our business model, though. We were speaking just previously with the story that, we sell boxes and we sell an automation system. We sell interfaces, and the interfaces become almost disposable in this case, or almost transitory to the actual project. Do you see this changing the actual business model, and how would you handle that transition?
Well, to handle the transition, obviously we will have to learn more about it and train and educate ourselves. But definitely minimizing hardware is becoming a trend. I mean, I remember 10 years ago, and I'm kind of going back to AV, I remember having to install 10 pieces of equipment, where now one piece of equipment does everything for you. So it is a trend of minimizing. Now, as far as chips for everything on the cloud, like the gentleman before hit on the head, I mean, you could put a chip on everything now. Well, not now, but I guess that will be the direction. How it changes our industry, we'll find out.
Well, let me Shai, let me ask you. First of all, you're muted, sir.
I know.
There we go. Sorry. We can cut that out. All right, so Shai, let me ask you this. Omar and David all touched on the fact that, yes, we can have things from anywhere. These pieces might just be mesh networks and easily swappable. Where a lot of our margins in this business do come from is the fact that we do have dedicated manufacturers that provide us with those, right? So if we're part of a dealer network with the big 3 or 4 control system companies, that's where our margins are, because we're dedicated to that and we can do volume and good margins. Here, our loyalty may not mean much.
Yeah, well, so it's an interesting comparison. Certainly, I think from a sheer volume perspective is where a lot of that will get made up, right? Especially kind of tailing back on what was said a little bit earlier, and that is they'll eventually be everywhere. I mean, do any of us remember growing up having a chip in our refrigerator, where our refrigerator tells us everything we want and recipes and when our milk is expired and when the chicken's going bad? And I mean, so the volume is growing. So from that perspective, I think the volume will be there, if not already there. In terms of the benefits of being part of that type of a network, I think the benefits really are going to come from the ability to put all of these pieces together, regardless of how many chips, how frequent you need them, if it's in a guitar pick, if it's in a refrigerator, if it's in your drone, if it's eventually it'll be in our children. I don't know. One day, right? Wherever.
Well, hopefully not.
You're not getting one in my kids, that's for sure. But wherever they go, I think ultimately having those experts with the expertise to be able to understand the crux and the core and how it all works and how it all comes together, I think that's where the money and the revenue will be.
But do you see any end to, say, the loyalty of a single company? Will they really have to come to us? Will it be a buyer's market, do you think, in any difference?
So take a look at so let's I equate it to any other product in our space, right? Let's take video, for example. I'm a video conferencing guy, right? Let's take video, for example. It used to be just 10 years ago. It was Cisco or Polycom, or Cambric at the time. That's really all you had. Nowadays, there's probably 105 that I could name. Maybe not all 105 at once, right? But at least 15 that I can give you that are large and they sell a lot and they're out there often. And so it's just a matter of, will it be competitive? Absolutely. But what's not today? Especially, you mentioned the term, George, a little while ago. You mentioned Internet of Things that they're talking about over at HP, etc. The Internet of Things whole mantra and whole model has allowed global consumers, global business people to have their choice of the best of the best. Oh, and by the way, I also will be able to read reviews from 100 other people who used all these products and see what they feel and what they think about it. It's just the way of our world. There's no other way around it. So just like everything else will be able to grow or decrease with this type of model, I think we're talking about the same scenario here.
All right, well, let's move on to the next story, which sort of touches on this idea of having all of that metricing available to us. We all know about smart buildings, but from the BBC, tomorrow's buildings smarter by design. Now, this is not just an article about the idea that we can do the metrics of doing our load shedding and putting the shades down when it's too bright on one side or up on the other to help with energy efficiency or anything like that. But what it really is talking about is the comfort and emotional, emotional influence the building and its operations has on those who use it, right? It's similar to something, we have a show called The Lightcast, and they interviewed a number of gentlemen from something called the Well Building, in which it takes into your right to light and circadian rhythms and all of these things of like how do night birds who work the overnight shift differ from people who work the daytime and how you affect those things. So this is a project by an architect and by a lighting designer to say, let's see how these people feel and if it can help change the physical way the building feels to them and making the building part of them. Shai, you mentioned that the biohacking, putting the chips and the sensors into somebody, this sort of is one of those bridges that would say, yes, I want that to be there because it will read how I'm feeling and reacting and try to alter it. Do you see that as being part of what we're eventually going to be implementing?
So first of all, this article is fascinating. This whole idea behind what this architect is doing is absolutely fascinating. So to answer your question, I don't know, unfortunately, but I can tell you that the larger issue will be the resistance of the people to put those chips inside of the human body. I think that's ultimately where the issue will come from. But in terms of kind of correlating those two things together, this will allow us, and I say us as the consumers and citizens of the world, will allow us to make things better on a custom basis. Right? There's going to be situations where a large building, if any of you have been into a large city like a New York, a lobby is going to be 1,000 different things. But every floor can be different based on, like you said, how the individuals are feeling, based on those shifts, time of day, graveyard, etc. So I think it's absolutely fascinating. But ultimately, I think before we get to the putting the chips in the people, I think the key card will probably be where it starts, and that key card will somehow tie to you and be able to sort of give at least Active Directory data, if not more, moving forward. So I think before we get into the actual chip placement, that's probably where we'll go first.
Yeah, and there's an interesting article in Commercial Integrator about the people at Wetworks, Bodyworks, who have been doing that kind of stuff for a number of years. But that aside, Omar, they talk about the sentiment cocoon, right? That's part of this article in which that's what they're really basing this on. My question to you is, we've dealt enough with our clients. Is this with their sort of, I don't like the lights this way. No, I know you had these presets made for you, but now I feel differently. Is this a boon or a bust for us in saying that we have to then have systems that react to that kind of sentiment cocoon?
I don't want to sound negative, but I think it's a bust. I mean, don't get me wrong. I believe that there may be a purpose and maybe somewhere where where it fits well. Like I believe the article did mention like for hospitals or lobbies and stuff like that, unless I got articles confused. But I could see where, like, let's say if if you're just naturally in a tough environment where you have to wait, you have to hold your child because you're waiting to get taken care of or looked at, and just naturally the light changes to some way somehow make you feel better. I guess that would be a good scenario. But to do it globally, to do it has like everyday type of function. I find that first of all, I find it hard to accomplish, and then also just to do it effectively.
All right. Well, that's a fair point. It's a fair point. And to David, I'll put this one to you as well, because do we have to now put as part of, say, our CTS or CEDIA qualifications, circadian rhythms and the well-building attitude? I mean, this becomes a whole nother host of things we have to learn, no?
I think it's important. I had mixed feelings about this article. On the one hand, I almost feel like this technology it's going to be a little bit after the fact. And the way I understood it, there's panels or an app or something where you put in your mood. So let's say that they learn that there's a certain hallway that bums people out. Well, what can they do? Expand the hallway, knock down the walls? I mean, once it's built, it's built. If it's a matter of painting it a brighter color. But I do like the whole thought of designing the buildings, not just for the function of the buildings, but for the people who are going to be in them. When I was a kid, I was a summer intern at a hospital in Manhattan, and it was designed for the patients. And that's great. You know, the patients, bright, well-lit rooms, wide hallways, they feel very comfortable. The patients hopefully are only there for a couple of weeks. The people that work there are there for years. And where they worked was terrible. The lower floors, we called it the dungeon. Dim, wet, dark, confusing. I would get lost, a maze, hard to get to where you want. It was almost as if the design of the building for the people who were going to be there all the time was just a complete afterthought. So I don't know whether this particular technology is going to solve the problem, but at least someone's thinking, hey, let's design these buildings so that the people who are in them aren't miserable.
Well, it's a fair point. I mean, you're asking a lot there, you know. Let's think ahead.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's move on to our next story, which I have to pull up. My apologies. Where'd it go? Where'd it go? There it is. All right, it is from IEEE Spectrum magazine. It is the ultrasonic signals transmit data through MEAT. Yes, MEAT, at HD video quality. You probably thought, why would I need to know what goes through my MEAT? Well, this is all about the maybe we touched on it. What, biohacking? The biological transmitters, or things used in medical, surgery, or diagnosis. It is about being able to send the radio signals through the tissue and bone without hurting the patient. That would be bad. But also so that you can get live streaming. You thought your Periscope and your live concerts were one thing. Now you can get live streaming from it going down your esophagus and through your intestines. Joy, right? But for those who do the medical world, this is a boon, I think. Omar, I'm going to start with you. You do some medical stuff, I think we've talked about just prior to the show. Can you see implementing this technology along with, say, your ability to do distributed video for the hospital or for their network?
I would say yes. I mean, absolutely. You could capture whatever they're doing. You know, you could stream it, and then from there send it anywhere. But I do want to say, it's a little bit of funny. Like, my first impression when I first just read the title, I was like, well, instead of selling, transmitter and receivers for HDMIs, now I sell them like 2 pieces of steak, and now we have high definition through MEAT. That was my first impression. But after reading the article, at first, as I was reading it, and again, not capturing the concept, I was maybe thinking about wearables. But ultimately, once I read it, to answer your original question, absolutely. If you could capture high definition, clear crystal pictures, images, and stream them into a system, you could send them anywhere. You could broadcast them. You could do whatever you want.
Yeah, I mean, David, do you deal with any of the sort of medical field at all?
Actually, it's funny. We're having a telemedicine month on my website at letsdovideo.com. So I'm going to be trying to push as much content as possible with the ATA conference coming up. It's not the focus of what I do, but I am very interested in it. And I definitely think there's an application for it. And it's funny, my reaction was the same reaction Omar had. It was a very clickbaity title. The first thing I had, we're going to replace our IP cables with Slim Jims. But I do think there's, and immediately I thought of an application. I have a friend who has a bad hip. And when he was a kid, he had to have it replaced. And the replacement hips, they have a life of 10 years. Every 10 years, he has to have surgery. And whether the old hip is bad or not, they have to do surgery, take it out, and put in a new one. And these hips have 10,000 flexes in them. So what if there was a sensor in them that was counting the flexes, and when it comes to 10,000, through the meat of his body, they're able to transmit that data, and that way he only has to have it replaced when he needs it, as opposed to on a 10-year schedule whether he needs it or not. So there's definitely, despite the humor in the title, there's definitely some real uses that'll save some people a lot of pain.
Indeed. Shai, I'm going to ask you sort of the oddball question here of this one for an oddball article. Do you see this technology extending out from, say, the medical biological? Do you see another use for this technology as it stands in that article?
You know, believe it or not, I think it might have something to do. So the first thing that popped into my head is the last article we talked about. Right? We talked about putting those chips inside people. I certainly think those might be related to one another. So I actually had a different reaction to when I initially opened the article than the other two gentlemen did. For me, it was more like, why the heck would I need that? Right? That was the first who would ever do that? And then the more I sat there and thought about it, and obviously read the article, so there's two different parts to this that are becoming, that will be really innovative to the medical industry, particularly telemedicine. Number one, the need for less bandwidth to do video is constantly getting lower and lower and lower, right? Now the need for more bandwidth is becoming less on the actual ability to get inside a human body, or any body for that matter. So those two parts coming together will eventually really be able to reform almost the telemedicine industry and the abilities to get certain things done, which I find fascinating. I also find fascinating that the way that the medical field does this today, it's a very highly dangerous way for the body, right? And if you read the article, it talks about specifics. I'm not too concerned with the details, but the way that it has to penetrate, because our body is what, 80% water, whatever the number is.
Something like that, yes.
So to get through not only the meat, but then all of the water and the salt within our bodies is really where the difficulty comes into place. And because we have to do that to get into the body, the way that we send out data and signals is very, very dangerous. This can enable us to do more at less of a harmful rate. I think that'll be the most staggering part about the technology.
Very cool. Yeah, no, it's very good points, and it's a very interesting technology beyond its sort of bio creepy factor that they were sort of pushing. But all right, well, gentlemen, we have reached our limit of the show, and it's more stories to cover, and I would love to get your opinions. You guys have been fascinating. We'll definitely want to have you guys on again. So I want to thank you guys for being on. First off, David, tell them where they can find out more about you and Let's Do Video.
Sure, you can check us out at letsdovideo.com. We're a vendor-neutral site covering business communications, team productivity, obviously a focus on video. Please check us out and sign up. We have a free newsletter in case you miss anything.
Thanks so much. And Omar, where can they find out more about you and Digital OAV?
Well, you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Digital OAV. The website is www.digitaloav.com. We're a small business to support small businesses, and but we do gigantic projects, and we're very proud, and we're here to serve.
Very cool. Thank you for being on. And Shai, thank you very much for being on. Where can they find out more about you and your company?
Sure. Yeah. Well, me personally, you can always find me on LinkedIn. You got my first name and last name. The website is communicationspros.com. You can also email me directly at shai, S-H-A-I, at communicationspros.com. In case you don't know what we do, we are a video, UC, collaboration, and AV consultancy. We don't sell hardware. We don't sell software, strictly professional services and engineering resources. Very
cool. Thank you very much. And also, most importantly, thank you for watching. This has been a production of AVNation. You can find shows like this and more. There's a AVI-SPL coming up very shortly on next Tuesday. We have shows on live staging, on education technology, on Pico projection, and many, many more. You can find all that at AVNation TV. And while you're there, please click on our underwriters page. These are the people who help make these shows possible. It'll be great. Go along and give them a thanks here and there. We really would appreciate it, and I'm sure they would too. So, for all of my panelists and the people at AVNation, I want to thank you very much for watching, and we will speak again very soon.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
This is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AV Nation.